I think it was Mark Twain that said, "No man has ever been damaged by his own introduction." And with our next moderator, I couldn't risk it. Mark Landon is going to be moderating a session here, which I hope is of great interest to you all and how we can become more experts in this niche field. I don't know about you, but over the last 2 days, it feels good to be with our people, doesn't it? People that understand what it is to do these types of jobs. Mark is our Director of Stewardship and Donor Relations. He's a former report person. He's got some expertise in our field as well, and a heart and understanding for some of the things that we go through. And he's going to do a great job. And let the guys introduce themselves after Mark, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good to be here. And I really am thankful that Chris gave me the opportunity to moderate the session right after lunch so that everybody's in their post-lunch coma right now. And I hope you stocked up on your caffeinated products. That, and I'm sure these guys will be riveting, and so this should be fun. We really want to encourage, though, some back and forth with the audience. You know, as Chris said, to get together with your own people, this is a rare opportunity, so we really want to take advantage of the opportunity to learn from one another, pick up ideas, insights, tips, and tricks. I think Chris asked me to moderate this particular session because he knows that I do not like to do the same thing more than once. Once I've done it, I kind of would like to move on to the next thing. So I am always very interested in any process that can be automated, should be, though unfortunately that sometimes means automating at any cost, and that isn't always the wisest choice. So maybe some of you are the same way. You do it once and you don't want to do it again, but we have a whole lot of factors to take into consideration when we're considering automating and streamlining things. So today what we want to do is have a conversation, and we have our two distinguished panelists here. From NC State, we have Kushal Dasgupta. He is the Senior Director of Information Services. And from the Lucille Packard Foundation for Children's Health, we have Jeff Dolan. And I'm going to let them do a little introduction of themselves in terms of your responsibilities and role and what you do and that kind of thing. So let me turn it over to you guys to introduce.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Jeff Dolan. I started off in development 21 years ago. I had worked my way through college as a seasonal park ranger for the National Park Service. And the California State Parks Foundation wanted somebody who knew parks, and they'd teach them fundraising. So started off as a fundraiser and program officer, and our database programmer. We had a DBase 3 database. Every time we asked him if we could do something, he told us we couldn't do it. So I got a little frustrated, picked up a DBase book, taught myself DBase, and pretty quickly all the things that he was telling us we couldn't do, we could do. And so that's what started my migration over to the system side. So for the last 12 years, I've worked for the Lucille Packard Foundation. And we were started back in '97 when the hospital was donated to Stanford and the foundation was spun off as a separate entity. And that probably is the main reason I have a job, is because we have to transfer the money that comes through us to Stanford and the pediatric programs at Stanford School of Medicine. And they needed somebody to figure out how we keep track of all of the money coming in and going out to 3 general ledgers and to 3 institutions. And so that's what I've done mainly over the last 12 years. I telecommute full-time, so I'm more like a free-flowing consultant. Come into the office one morning a week, and some people were talking about having time to do creative things. Fortunately, that's what I get to do every day, is just think about things that if somebody doesn't bring something to me, I'm taking the time to find something that might be new that I think might meet a need that the staff has.
I am, like Mark said, I'm the Senior Director of Information Services, and I've been in advancement for about 10 years. I got my start as a graduate student working at a college of business, and I was helping them with their alumni relations. little did I know that I was creating a shadow database that eventually I had to get rid of as the Director of Information Services. So that's how I got started in advancement. Today I manage a team of IS and IT professionals that manage the advancement services technology for NC State. NC State is is a state institution, student body of about 32,000 students and 8,000 faculty and staff.
Great, thanks. All right, so let's set a little context for what we're talking about here. Automation and streamlining, it might be one of those things that seems totally intuitive, but maybe not. So maybe Kushal, we'll start with you. When we say those terms, how are you thinking about it?
So as I was thinking about this session this afternoon, in terms of streamlining and automating, what I am thinking about is processes that we do routinely, either daily, weekly, or monthly, yearly. And these are repetitive processes that there is a certain expectation of an outcome. There's also a certain process that you have to go through. And because it is repetitive, there is an opportunity for us to make sure that the resources are used in the most efficient manner. And I know Wart mentioned something about headspace. This is an opportunity, if it is a repetitive process, if you improve upon it, that's how you can probably create some resources to invest in other newer projects that you want to invest in. And you control some of these processes end to end because it is defined. So that's what I'm envisioning becoming an expert in, is streamlining these repetitive processes to make sure that you've utilized your resources to the fullest extent.
Jeff, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think Kushal hit it all on the head there. For a lot of my end users, especially the big high-up end users and major gifts, it's basically they want to double-click the mouse and they want what they need to be right there. And oftentimes that's what I get involved in, and sometimes it's 40 hours, sometimes it's 500 hours, and a recent project was 1,500 hours to take people to that level.
Do you sometimes get the impression people wish you could create a button that would be do my job and they got paid for pushing your button?
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma because we have people at both sectors. We have the people who want the point and click, and interestingly enough, the people who maybe would be considered the digital natives, often coming out of, we tend to get a lot of Stanford grads since we're connected with Stanford. There seems to be a reluctance on the part of people just out of school to accept some of the automation. And so occasionally I'll see somebody doing something and we'll mention, well, we could actually probably streamline that to about a 5-second process. And sometimes they won't take us up on it. So I'm finding that a lot of it has to do with being a data psychologist is what I'm calling it lately. And you have to make sure that you're not intimidating the people so that they're going to look bad because they've been doing it in 40 hours and you're going to show them you could spend 5 hours and reduce it down to something less than a minute.
Yeah, there's a threat to job security there in a way.
Definitely.
Right? Yeah, have to walk the fine line. All right, so just for everybody out there, as we're going along, if you want to ask a question, just kind of, send up a smoke signal or something and get our attention. We would love to entertain your questions. Let's start with the first one, though. Kind of, in your setting, what are your tools? What tools do you have at your disposal for automating, and kind of what's your particular environment like? This is a group that, unlike probably some of the other ones you've been with, they'll probably get what you're talking about. So even if you want to give us some of the nuts and bolts of it, that would be great.
Okay. Well, I'll start. Well, of course, PL SQL tool is one of our major tools, so Toad or PL SQL developer. Interestingly, at NC State, which is slightly different from the other state institution I was in, our shop has access to the other ERP systems. So read access, but it is there. So we are able to access the student, the financial, and the HR systems, which is unlike the previous institution I was in. So I would consider that a tool. Also, for scheduling jobs, we have Tivoli. And so we use it for a job scheduler. You can schedule certain things for certain times and optimize the certain schedules to meet the needs of your users. Of course, our database is on a Unix system, so we have some scripting Perl-like utilities that are on the system that allow us to pick a file from a place and push it to another location. Last but not least, we have access, or we have the SaaS suite of software available to us. And although SaaS is in higher education, the kind of software I'm talking about is the Data Integration Studio and Business Intelligence. And it is used more in the corporate world, but because NC State has a connection with SaaS, the founder of SaaS was an alumni of NC State, and he's also a big donor. We have access to the SaaS suite of products. So those are the tools in our shop.
Yeah, at the foundation, we're a staff of 75, about 45 fundraisers. And since we've only been around since '97, our constituent record count is about 130,000, about 400,000 gifts. So fortunately, that makes it pretty easy for me to just harvest the Microsoft Office. I heavily use Microsoft Access as my Swiss Army knife that I use for a lot of things. Lately, I've been experimenting with a product called Tableau, which I'm actually hoping to use as our rapid fire, as they bill it, rapid fire on-demand business intelligence. Hopefully my end users are going to be able to do some of the things on their own. I try to keep it as low-tech as possible since I'm the only person developing anything and I don't have time to support it. So if I can harvest anything, whether it's using the macro features in Excel or Access or Word, or whether it's using the Q feature of Razor's Edge to put some data marts out for me. I can't be an expert at anything. The only thing I'm an expert at is being a generalist, so I've never really got involved with the SQL engine itself.
So are you doing a lot of front-end kind of UX work with that then? Is that what you're talking about? Forms and people interacting with the data as opposed to you manipulating it?
Well, what usually happens for us is our biggest need is transferring the money. Every month we need to transfer money out that's come in the previous month, and when that whole system is set up to run out of our fundraising database, so any time that's left over from that usually goes to the major gifts group, and they usually like stuff in Excel, and they want to click on an Excel document and maybe has 20 sheets inside of it. And when they click on it, they want to click refresh the data, and they want all 20 sheets to be updated and look exactly the way they want. And fortunately, I have the time to do that, and so we engineer whatever they want, however they want it to look, we present it the way that they want it to come out.
I just heard millions of fundraisers sighing out there at the thought of being able to refresh a spreadsheet at the push of a button like that. So let's talk about some specific things, some projects, some automation projects that you have undertaken in each of your specific areas.
Okay. So one of the things that we have done recently is try to automate it, and it is not fully automated. The process of bringing student, parent, and graduate information from our student systems to the advancement systems. So that's been one project. We've also, and we are an advanced institution, Sungard Advanced Institution, and we recently rolled out Advanced Web. And part of Advanced Web is if you have three environments, you have dev, QA, and production, when you build these forms, you have to do certain things in dev, repeat that process in QA, and then repeat that process in production. Well, that is, like I was suggesting, that is a repetitive process. So we've developed a Perl utility and written PL SQL behind the scenes that essentially at a click of a button you can move your forms from one environment to another. So that's what we've done recently. And most institutions do this. We've developed a gift feed, but additionally we've done something with payroll where HR sends us some information about payroll. It does what it needs to do in advance in terms of crediting people that have payroll deductions, and then making sure that the payroll deducts are credited to the right beneficiary account. So we've done some automation there. People sign up for payroll, and that process is now within this it is part of the job that automates that process, so no one really has to touch it. I think the last example I would give is on a nightly basis we replicate our production systems with our reporting systems. So that's again a repetitive process. We time it, and there's a replication process, but there's also creation of some flag tables, some staging tables that allow for better reporting. So those are some of the examples of automation that we have at NC State.
Jeff?
Yeah, probably recently the two most common things. One is for the hospitals, the new trend is to try to do grateful patient family mailings. So the fundraisers are getting a list from the hospital of all the patients who visited the hospital yesterday, and they want to compare it against the database. So the hospital is putting out a secured, password-protected, zipped file on an FTP site. So I just put something together that picks the file up, moves it over, expands it out, compares it to the database, produces a report, and emails the report out at 6:15 in the morning. And it shows everybody that's in the database that was at the hospital, their total giving, if they have an officer assigned, and their name and their city that they live in. And right connected to that, they want to do a monthly mailing, so they get a much bigger list of everybody who was in the hospital or visited the clinics. They need to bring that list over. It needs to be compared to the database. It needs to be compared to a suppression list of everybody who says they don't want to be solicited. And that was a project that's a good example of scope creep, because when I first started designing it for people, I was designing a little Swiss Army knife of pick the file up, compare it to these things, run it through some loops, and put the file back out to send to the vendor. And I was anticipating maybe 20 to 40 hours, and after about 500 or 600 hours, we now have a full application built with a nice fancy little screen, and it has 2 or 3 buttons, and you press one button and it brings all the lists in and it runs it. And you can press another button and say, I want it mailed to people, and it asks what's the mailing date, what's the appeal code, and it assigns that. And you press the third button and it puts the list back out. Those are 2 of the main major ones that I just recently did.
I want to pause for a second to see if there's any questions. Yeah.
I'm curious how Jeff keeps track of the hours that he spends in projects.
Yeah, I'm trying to get better at ballparking it, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the hours that we're allocating, that we'd found that certain end users kind of take it for granted that they have a custom application developer, and we'll develop something for them that does something really neat, and we'll find out 3 months later that they dropped the program after about a month or something. And so we're trying to make sure we don't spin our wheels. So I'm not real good at documenting things. So I recently just got my development service director here, Jenny Bailey, who was here with me, and myself. We started using a product called Smart Draw, which has a mind mapping feature. And I'm trying to make sure whenever I work on anything or a project, I have my software there with my mind map, and so I maybe put down a time that I started, so I'm getting better at estimating the hours so that we can make sure we're not servicing something that's not really worth the return on investment.
Other questions? It brings to my mind the question of scope creep that you mentioned. How do you manage that in this? My experience has been as soon as you mention to somebody, hey, you know, we could speed that up, you get the, oh, really? Well, what about this and this and this and this? How do you manage scope creep?
Get as much in writing as possible, honestly. But no, I think it comes back to what Wart mentioned. You know, you have to kind of recognize what the user needs and not really what the user wants. You have to look across the silo sometimes to see what it is that the process is achieving for your department and your division and the institution. So some of the scope creep is really how much you understand the process. And to give you an example, in our student-parent graduate rollover process, we realized that even though we had a streamlined process, it is how the admissions office is collecting the data that was not optimal. So I literally applied as an undergraduate to figure out what it is that a person is doing when they're filling out that information that it is that needs to be streamlined.
Did you get accepted?
No, I did not. Because I put in all kinds of information that probably will not get me accepted. But the point is, you want to try to understand the scope first to make sure there isn't a scope creep. And sometimes what you're trying to automate is not even in your silo. You have to reach across the silo and figure out where there's a source of disconnect that might cause problems with your streamlining process.
Do you want to add anything to that?
I just have to say I'm not real good at doing that. my projects often escalate as they go along. I'm trying to get better at it.
How have you dealt with the issue, though, that comes up, with, especially with scope creep, and Jeff, the example you gave, where you develop something and then they drop it? Do you go back? How do you respond when you find out that that happens?
Well, I basically came up with the philosophy that if 30 to 50% of the time the projects I develop keep being used, then I'm probably doing pretty good, because unfortunately it's kind of like being a mining engineer, and I've got this whole team of fundraisers out there who are going out drilling shafts out ahead of me and asking me to come on behind them and build some structure to it. And we're never really quite sure whether they're going to continue on a program or they're going to drop the program. But for me, the thing that usually dictates the time is the major gift folks get 90% of the time.
So that's an interesting point. Is that okay that you develop something and then it doesn't get used to the full potential? Kind of like striking out at the plate. You know, if you're hitting 300, you're a great hitter.
Yeah, it's definitely disappointing when you do some things and find out, but unfortunately it just comes with the territory.
Yeah. I mean, there are projects that you work on that don't get utilized the way you had envisioned it, but that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
What's the example of integration with student database? How much time or effort do you spend on data profiling when you integrate content?
How much? So your question is, how much time do we spend on data profiles?
Yeah, so when you're trying to integrate, how do you make sure that whatever you integrate in it is actually there? So you said you actually ran into the issue that people from admission didn't type something properly, so that's not profiling, right?
Right.
So records were not completed or something. So is it sometimes that gets process? Or
Well, sometimes it depends on where the process is. When I first looked at it, we had an existing process, and it just seemed like to me that it was not efficient. So even though the process was in place, we took the time to investigate how to improve it because it was taking much longer than what I would have expected the process to take. It really, in terms of these processes, you don't come across building newer ones as much as you come across looking at ones that exist already and that were built a number of years ago and things were differently aligned. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I think you have to weigh, sometimes it's your gut instinct. You know that if a process is taking 3.5 months and you think it should only take a month and a half, then probably you should spend 4 days trying to figure out what the process is currently and trying to streamline it. So it really is, you'd have to balance that. I don't think you're out looking for bringing in efficiency in every single step of the process because you do not have that much that kind of time to do that.
And the question is, if sometimes that you are looking at the key, suddenly it doesn't get populated and your integration breaks. It's because of the neighbor system doesn't have it, not nullable.
Yeah, and you run into those situations sometimes, and you have to do what you can. At that point, you're trying to put a Band-Aid on that fix, and then trying to make sure the next time you have a better process. But some of the ways to mitigate that it would be to be aware of your neighbors' systems and find out when they're upgrading, because usually their upgrades are where things get dropped, and so as much as you can, put yourself out there to see all the touch points to your central system, and at least keep up with what their upgrade schedule is, because if there is an upgrade, you pretty much know that's going to create some issue in the extract unless they have a process of testing those extracts. So the way to mitigate that would be to make sure the neighboring systems that hit your process are keeping you up to date with changes that they are having. And that's not always easy, but getting yourself on a listserv is probably something that I would suggest you do to keep up with it. Any other questions?
Doesn't that, basically, if you put in a streamlining process, doesn't that, and then you have to support it through upgrades and stuff, doesn't that not kind of defeat the purpose of streamlining?
Well, again, it depends. You probably don't have as many upgrades as many times as you have those data processes. So really, if you are repeating it 5 times a year and you're upgrading once every 2 years, then that's a 10-to-1 ratio. For the kinds of information that we are talking about, that kind of information does not change as much with upgrades. So there are probably 3 or 4 upgrades before address information changes or a student ID scheme changes. That doesn't happen as much. It's usually the length of the character field changes, and those are easier fixes. So I think if you weigh the two, you're still better off streamlining than worrying about upgrades. Question?
I actually want to comment on that. There's processes that we haven't streamlined because we look at the cost, the time that it would take, 20 hours to streamline the process. We do it once a year, it takes 2 hours. I'm going to retire before that actually becomes time effective. So I think that's just what you have to do when you sort that out of voluntary.
Right.
Yeah, we're kind of dancing around the next question here. Maybe we can just get to it more specifically. And that is, when a project is brought to you for consideration as a candidate for automating. What are the factors that you look at as you evaluate that potential project?
Well, what I usually advise people to do is you need to look at how often you're doing it, how long it takes, and how hard is it for you to accomplish it. If you're doing it, the more frequently you're doing it, the harder it is for you to do it, and just the more frustration you're having because you're not really kind of muddling your way through, then that might be the project I could help you look at. If it's something you're doing sporadically and there's all sorts of shades of gray in there that I'm not going to be able to factor in a kind of black and white automation process, then those are the ones that you probably keep doing. But it's usually how often and how much time it's taking to do the project.
And a couple of things I'd like to add to that would be probably can you support the automation process? Are you using technology that is one-off and by a person that has a certain skill set that is difficult to acquire and keep in your shop? That is a consideration to make. We don't want people to develop something so specific that it is difficult to replace or maintain if that person is no longer in your shop. Kurt did a great session yesterday. Security is one of the things that you want to keep in mind. I mean, are you going off and getting data and opening up, or if you're trying to match information, are you sending your data to a site that is not as secure? So security should probably be one of your considerations. The biggest one, though, I think that I look at is can you have fewer points of intervention in the process? If you can have fewer points of intervention, I think then the process itself becomes inherently more efficient. If you have more hands touching the process, then it slows down. Then you're looking at people's schedules, and you're looking at when they're out of the office, and you're looking at not enough support for it. So fewer points of intervention is probably something that is a key indicator of whether you should make that process efficient or not, or streamline it further. If you have many hands touching, then that's probably it goes to a performance issue. Then you're not performing as optimally as I think you can. Yeah.
What is the way you keep track of your automated processes?
What is the way we keep track of our
So
automated?
you have jobs here and there, tasks here and there, doing something without any interactions with humans. Something breaks, something doesn't.
Yeah, so I think our
Lease, whatever, any life.
right at the lowest level, it is our scheduler. It's the Tivoli process that is our scheduler, and what it is essentially you have scheduled that job, and part of how you have scheduled the job is to alert you that it was successful, and to alert you if it wasn't. So just looking at those email alerts that tells you that they were successful or not is really a best bet to know that the jobs were scheduled. So I have a separate email folder where I have all the notifications that are successful, and I have an email rule that alerts me if there was some job that was not successful. So essentially that is the lowest level. And once you get that alert, then you can dig further down into seeing what essentially broke the process. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
So I assume you're using the similar technology for all your jobs, but you use a different technology. Like you're not running store procedure, but you're running SSIS path, or you're running something I don't know from Oracle thing that I don't know about. Just different technologies that doesn't fit into one server.
Yeah, and I think that's where we have the advantage that Tivoli is able to schedule different kinds of stuff in one place. So that way I think we're lucky that It can trigger a Perl script, it can trigger, some other process, and it's all in one spot. And our alerts are all identical, which is they are either successful or unsuccessful. So that has worked for us. I haven't done much research on the scheduler software, but that is what has worked best for us is having Tivoli do that for us, suggesting when, because you cannot keep up with so many processes, and you really don't want to spend more than or any time if the process was successful. So it really needs to be ignored. Only if it is unsuccessful would you want to look at it.
Yeah, I usually make sure that somebody has ownership of the thing that I'm automating so that, and I always caution them that it's running on its own. So you need to take ownership and monitor the data. If somebody's changed a field name or they quit filling in a data element that we need, it's going to only produce what it was programmed to produce. And we had actually an example of that recently. The hospital forgot to, somebody at the hospital forgot to start updating the list that was put on the FTP site every day. And my gal that was, who I automated it for, she came back after X number of days and said, well, that's kind of strange because I haven't seen anybody on the list. And then I went down and I checked and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it was September 26th was the last date of the file. Although the file was over there, it was just picking up the same file and bringing the same file across. So I had to set up a batch file to run to check the folder to make sure that after the file is brought over and unzipped that the date equals the current date for me. And so you have to end up, depending on the procedure, building in some things after the fact, after you find out what variables might change on you.
How many of your projects are for automation are ones that you have decided need to be automated versus somebody brought it to you and said, can you make this better for us?
I think for the most part, we are looking for ways to automate more than others are, because I think we are in a position to know what kind of tools we have to automate processes. Annual giving, for example, has so many different things that they do repetitively, and there is one that we picked out and made it for them. I don't think they were thinking along those lines. So I would say majority of what we automate is coming really from us, and it is to better utilize our resources and not us doing the same thing over and over again.
What do you do?
Yeah, for me, it could be a real mix. If I've got a major gift officer who keeps asking for something and they say it's a one-off, they never need it again, but then I find out a couple months later they need it, at that point I start triggering on, okay, should we start storing certain data elements because I can kind of predict that another 2 or 3 months from now they're going to tell me that in 1 hour they're going in a meeting and they need something.
You had a question?
I actually wanted Michelle, could you expand a bit on your automation for annual giving?
Okay. This was, I think most institutions do this, but NC State was not doing this at the time. There was a certain level of giving, annual giving, that triggered certain responses from the annual giving office. And what essentially they were looking at was they were getting daily gift reports that they were then in an Excel spreadsheet working on it, trying to figure out if they reached that certain threshold, and they were going back and flagging those people. So essentially and there were other considerations to make. Were there matching claims associated with that person? Was the gift unrestricted? There was a certain pattern of giving that they were trying to promote or encourage. And we just found a way to create a gift club in advance that put that flag on there for certain givers that they were looking for. So that was the automation process. They were doing this completely manually in Excel spreadsheets and adding things up. We just converted that process into a daily daily PL SQL procedure that looks at, after gifts are processed, looks at that pattern that they were looking for.
Have you ever had any negative feedback in trying to automate any certain process, specifically one that might be somebody's job, like letter writing, for example, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, you have to take the good with the bad sometimes. But but essentially, our institutions, I think there is enough to do where that is not as much of an issue. I think most people are happy that we are automating things for them. I don't think at NC State, I've not yet run into that situation. How about you, Jeff?
Yeah, I used to I worked for an accounting firm and did consulting, and we worked a lot with the Catholic Archdiocese in San Francisco. And they had a case where nobody could get a computerized list of the priest. They had about 20 different secretaries in different offices, and they'd all retype them. And we just would turn the list over to somebody to type them. And you'll run into roadblocks sometimes where people, they are going to hang on to something for whatever reason, and you just have to kind of work around them.
That speaks to a question that I just kind of wrote down a little bit ago. If you could talk about a time when you were trying to automate and you ran into a technical problem. We've heard a question about, somebody fails to put something in, or you have various systems that don't talk to each other. Can you give us an example of one of those from your experience and what you did to work around it or push through it?
Well, we just recently, we tried to have somebody come and help me, and I hired a young computer grad from UC Berkeley, and he designed an application that was going to pick up information off of a Convio website, pull it down into Access, run it through some loops, manufacture some data elements, and put it back out so that it could be picked up with this other product called Importomatic so we could get it into our database. And then he decided he was going to go back to Harvard, and then he left. And I hadn't really looked at the product. And then my development services director made me aware of the fact that when somebody's creating one of these personal pages on the website, after they fill everything out, there's a button on the bottom that says, I want to donate now. And because their web page actually hasn't been saved at that point, it doesn't have this proxy ID, which our whole system was based on. And so that transaction shows up as a registration fee instead of a donation. So the 3 reports that he had that pulled out CSV files that we were bringing in to incorporate in couldn't get that piece of information. We had to go get yet a 4th report, a registration report, to bring out a 4th CSV file to bring it into the mix. But I was missing the proxy ID. So I just looked around and I saw there was this other ID that wasn't being used. And I'm like, okay, we're just going to program in here. If it's null, grab this other ID and feed it in there. And at the moment, I'm crossing my fingers that Jenny doesn't tell me that the system blew up there. But pretty typical with a lot of the vendors who promise these fully integrated, automated systems. You usually end up in this area where people are saying, oh, there's shades of gray out here, and it's up for you to figure out how you're going to get from here to there. And sometimes it's just experimentation.
Again, yeah, typically we've run into problems when the other system has upgraded or there is a change in the format that they expect the data or give the data, and it still is not as much of a problem. I think automation still does a lot for us. There are not as many problems for us in the breakdowns that occur. Question?
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to what Jeff was talking about. It's really great when we have this whole reporting database and this whole group of programmers who can automate things. But what do you do when you have a proprietary database, that you are doing software as a service? I'm interested in how you might automate
Well, for us, we have two groups, divide the development into two groups. We have a group that actually can use the canned reports, and then we have the major gift folks whose world has been so customized that we don't actually ever even attempt to use any of the canned reports. So we just pull data down, and I just link stuff up and manufacture data elements that I need in order to get them what they want. Usually, my fundraisers will usually come and tell me this is exactly what I want, this is how it's supposed to look, and what the field headings are supposed to be, and we just manufacture it. And sometimes doing that is not that easy. I always say the time, talent, treasure that you use for your board members is kind of the same thing you can use on the projects. It's like, well, we can accomplish almost anything. If you want to throw enough time, talent, and treasure at it, we can do just about anything. If you're getting limited on any of those variables, then you might have to make some sort of a trade-off. But I think there's a lot of job security out there for people who want to be what I coin as a creative generalist who can work around all these obstacles.
Do you have experience with some kind of integration with centralized government databases, like census data, or anything that applying consumer price indexes to data reports or sort of the real time type of thing? So I shouldn't go grab, copy and paste something from web.
Any experience with that?
Yeah, I don't at all. We do have a division that does data publishing. We have a website, it's called kidsdata.org, and we get a lot of information from CDC and some other things, but I haven't really worked with those folks that much.
Yeah, so I'll throw it back to the audience. Is there anyone in the audience that brings in data from central government resources or any other central databases?
Census?
Census?
Like labor department or ever just for specific
Yeah, Department of
salaries
Labor.
or anything.
I don't know if anyone else has lead prospect point in Flashbot, and you do get like consumer pen data included in that, so SEC, campaign donation data, some census data in there, and real estate. It's part of our screening methodology, but it's fee-based, so it's
No, not enough open source, sometimes up for grabs.
I have seen, there is a software package that will do that we don't currently use, since we do have it as programmers, but that pulls in, and I know they have like some census data and some other stuff in there, but my understanding of people who I know in other universities who are using census data is that you either, pay for the disks, or it takes quite a bit to go around, dig it up off the website, find where they buried it, and then actually integrate it. But getting the government data is, it's free, but it's incredibly time consuming, or what do you pay? So, what are the other?
There are a lot of those sites have web services now. You know how to write web services where you can call out postal service packages to address validations and things like that. But I mean, you're talking about real-time integration in a sense, because you're calling out to a web service with an application and expecting a immediate response.
At least once per month, something automated that will data.
To do my box shop.
I want to ask one pretty simple question, but I think it's an important one because I imagine at one time or another, people in here will find themselves sitting across the table from somebody who wants them to improve a process, and it's not a candidate. How do you explain to people why their particular pet project is not something you're going to be able to do for them?
I think at that point you have to really be honest with the process and see, you have to have good reasons for saying no, and I think you have to illustrate why that process does not make sense to streamline. And sometimes if you think that the process is going to change, next semester or next year, that is a good reason for why you shouldn't streamline such a process, because the cost of doing it twice is probably 10 times more than literally doing it the way without streamlining. So I think the proof is in the pudding, and so you would want to show them how it wouldn't make sense to do. So I think that's the best argument in terms of not taking one of those projects.
So Jeff, tell me no.
Yeah, for me, it would just really depend. I mean, like I said, a lot of my stuff is just dependent on how much time I have to give to people, and I think people realize that the money transfer to the university and the major gift people come first. The rest of the time, if I have any left, I can help with them. If at all possible, I like to try to have the people let me sit down with them, look over their shoulder, and even if I'm not going to have time to actually do a full-blown analysis of what they need or try to help them out, oftentimes if I just watch what they do, I can give them some helpful hints on how I can see where they're trying to end up, and I might say, well, you know, you're actually starting at a point that makes it relatively difficult to get where you're trying to end up. If you'd start over here instead, you might end up over there very quickly, and you won't even need me to help you out.
So diversion.
Possibly, yeah.
I want to, oh, well, okay, question.
One of my strategies, I just say, Mark, you've got that access database too complicated, I'm not touching it.
Helps if you know them, right? Yeah.
Slightly tangential question, but how much time do you spend on like creating the user end manuals or procedures, and how do you introduce them to those departments once you've created this streamlining?
So the question was about basically do you create documentation for your new processes? How do you introduce it to people? Good question. Maybe the better question is, do you create documentation?
Yeah, I had found until I turned 50 that I could memorize all kinds of things in my head, and it's been downhill ever since. And that's actually why I'm starting to use that program SmartDraw with the mind map, because the majority of the things I've developed have very minimal documentation. For me, my quick, easy way to documentation up to this point is I use Excel and I do screenshots. I paste a screenshot in there, and then I type a few lines of text above there that give me some indication of what I'm trying to accomplish here. I name that particular sheet with some intuitive name, and I fire up another sheet, I get another screenshot, and so I go for as much visual and as small amount of text as possible. And I'm trying to get better at documentation, but I think that's what my employer is worried about, is that about 95% of everything is not documented at the moment.
Yeah, and again, you try to document as much as possible. You try to put it as part of the project cost when you initially scope the project out. And there are tools now available that allow you to document things quicker. I'm interested in the mind mapping software that Jeff is talking about. I haven't used it as much. But yeah, you try to do what you can as much as you can, and it is good business practice. It is good practice for your shop, and the more you do it, the better off you are. But it's never 100%. So.
But as far as user manuals, I mean, we do have our development service team that comes up with some user manuals for people. And I always say, try to have as many visuals as possible. And you need to hire people who understand process, because if you're going to document it in text to the nth degree, I can guarantee you're never going to keep that documentation updated. And it might make the auditors and the CEO happy at the end of the year that they've got something that's 500 pages, but probably within a month or two, the majority of the document's outdated and nobody's going to look at it. And so my thing is try to keep your documentation down to a real functional level that somebody who understands the process can go through the visuals, and then they could look and they could see, oh, I see, we changed that, so I can ignore this piece. I'll go over to the next one. So I'm not real big on spending a lot of time on written, detailed documentation.
Okay, well, that's...
Just a comment on documentation. It's better to have my personal experience is that it's
better to have the documentation embedded into the stuff you're doing, so that when you change stuff, coding, whatever, you can change the documentation. If you have a separate, then yeah, they're going to be all these kind of hours.
Yeah, documenting your code. We're just about out of time. I want to ask one last question, a quick answer. Kind of what's the next big thing in this regard? Maybe a tool, Jeff, you talked about your mind map tool, but in your mind, what's the next big idea that's out there in regard to automation, streamlining, improving systems like that? Anything you use in particular?
Well, not something we use right now, but web services is an interesting opportunity. If you can use web services or create web services for others to use, I think that streamlines. It's inherently streamlined. So I think web services is the next big thing that we haven't adopted as much, but I think we should. And I'm just going to throw out one more idea out here. I don't know if this is as much automation, and I don't know if Mike is in the room, but one of the things that we could do with alumni, with constituent information, is utilize some of the web services and present information from different sources in one web environment, and present the different sources as coming from that source, and not necessarily bring that source information into our database. So for example, if you are Facebook, is there an opportunity, and I don't know if this is possible, is there an opportunity for us to show a donor profile from our advanced database, and also at a click of a button take them to that Facebook profile of that person, and kind of show them both profiles simultaneously, and not have to scrape data, bring it in, and go through all those considerations.
I'm sure there's a lot of prospect researchers who would be very interested in that.
Right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, for me, I'm trying to reduce down the special ad hoc report request. And so the product, like I mentioned a couple times, I'm trying to play with right now is Tableau. And if you read the Gartner Magic Quadrant they come out with every January that benchmarks these different BI tools, the Tableau occupies the little niche that they're calling self-service business intelligence. And what I'm hoping to do is to take some of my power users that are out in the different groups of development and give them something, either Tableau, if that doesn't work, something else like that, where they can build some interactive KPI dashboards where people can do their what-if analysis and change things without people coming and giving me, this is specifically what it has to look like, and it has to be a PDF that's emailed at a certain time, because things are just getting way too bottlenecked for me as one person to be able to meet all the, and I think that's a market that's really growing, that in the Gartner quadrant there's like 3 major leaders in there right now. There's ClickView, Spotfire, and Tableau, I think, are the three big companies. And just for me, the Tableau product, I found it extremely easy to use, and anything that my end users can use that they don't have to go to all kinds of training for, that they can pick up intuitively, that is something I'm interested in.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate you being willing to sit with us and share your thoughts. I understand we have probably about 25 minutes now until the last speaker. Is that right? Kai will be our last one. Great way to end the conference. So thank you, everyone.